Big sound.
All right.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for today's RACCs lunch conversation. I am Jen Wilson, the Director of Programming and Advocacy with NEMA, and joined with Kayla Coleman, our ED, and with Heather, who is our Director of Administration. And I'm going to hand it right over to Emily, who is our RACCs Chair.
Hey, everybody. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, I'm Emily, the RACCs Chair, which is the Registration and Collections Care Specialist Group of the New England Museum Association. If you are not yet a member, I would highly encourage you to join. You're welcome to message me or Jen or Heather or anyone else that is on representing NEMA. And today we are joined by a very dear friend of mine, Emily Weeks. I'm so excited is here. Emily is a registration specialist for the Office of the Registrar at the National Air and Space Museum and our nation's capital. This is part of the Smithsonian. It's one of the Smithsonian museums. Emily holds a BA from St. Olaf College and a master's degree in museum studies from the George Washington University. Her current work at NASM is focused on the Transformation Project, which is their 8-ish year process of completely renovating the museum's National Mall building. And that designation is important because they also have an offsite facility and a facility at Udvar, which Emily, I don't know if you're talking about it, but if you are,
yes.
Great segue. Her work includes training and supporting users of the museum's object barcoding system, tracking objects as they are disassembled and moved, and so much more. And with that, I will pass it off to Emily.
Hello. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Share. All right, can everyone see my screen now? Good, all right. So welcome to How to Track a Transformation. Emily covered some of this already, but I have worked, obviously my background, and then I've worked at the National Museum of Natural History and also the Park Service. But I've been with the National Air and Space Museum, or NASM is what I will be calling it for the rest of the time because it's much shorter, since 2015 in a variety of roles. So I'm currently in the Office of the Registrar supporting the Transformation Project. So at NASM, because we're so large, registration is part of the collections department, but we have collections folks who do like shipping, packing, handling of objects, and then registration is responsible for the sort of intellectual side of managing objects, so database, inventory, that kind of stuff. A little background for anyone who doesn't know about NASM. So NASM is part of the is part of the Smithsonian Institution. And actually, most of our early scientists and secretaries for the Smithsonian were really interested in aviation. So what became NASM's collection actually started very early on in the collection. So like kites, balloons, that kind of things. And then our collection of aeronautics objects grew really rapidly in the 1910s and 20s as aviation really started to capture the public's imagination. So that by the 1920s, we had to build a separate building behind the castle. I don't know if people have been to DC, but the traditional big red sort of castle-y building behind it, where there is now a garden, we built this lovely, what was called the tin shed, a big Quonset hut, to house all of these planes and balloons and that kind of stuff. And then the Smithsonian, it was the National Museum, was broken up into separate units in the 40s. So the aviation collection was taken and they created the National Air Museum. And then as the national space race started to heat up, the National Air Museum was actually changed to be the National Air and Space Museum in 1966. And then we opened the National Mall building in 1976. So that's the traditional one I think most people see when they hear air and space in their head. This very cubist sort of building on the mall. And then in 2003, we expanded again with the Udvar Center, which is out in Virginia. It's by Dulles. Sometimes you hear it called the Chantilly site. So different names, but that's where the space shuttle is. That's our big hangar space. And then as Emily mentioned, we also have a third site, which is is our earlier storage site. We're trying to move out of there. But that's also a bunch of sort of airplane hangar type things. All right, so transformation itself is the comprehensive reimagining of NASM's public spaces and exhibitions at all of our sites. And we're trying to do things like take new approaches on how NASM interprets and presents artifacts in our original research, We also have goals like using more interpretive techniques with label writing, displays, interactive components, and digital technology to enhance our visitor experience. And then as a sort of subset of that transformation process is revitalization. And that focuses specifically on the restoration of the National Mall building. So as so many things in the government, our building was actually sort of lauded for coming, it was built under time and under budget in 1976. So 40 years later, it was really starting to show its age, especially where they had cut corners during construction. So things like the exterior stone, the glass, the HVAC system had basically all hit their planned lifespan, needed to be replaced, and that was in itself a major undertaking. So as they sort of looked at the scope of work needed done on the building, they sort of realized that we need to deinstall all of the objects from the building because there's no way to work on the exterior of the building stone without exposing the gallery. That was the only barrier built into the building. We didn't have an internal vapor barrier and then the stone, it was just the stone. So the minute you take the stone off, it's just open. The problem with the stone was that it was the stone that was used on the building was too thin because it was under budget. It was supposed to be an inch, and then I think they used a half an inch. So basically, the stone started to warp over time, and that was allowing things to seep into the building that we didn't want them. So taking all that off to replace it with better new stone means you have to empty out the galleries. But this presented us then with the opportunity to sort of completely reimagine all of the exhibits since the building needed to be emptied. So we sort of could clean slate it. So my part in this massive project is to help track all of the objects as they come and go. So I'm mostly going to talk about our deinstall process, but I'll also cover some bits on installation towards the end. All right, so, excuse me. So for some of our initial challenges, one of the things was to shorten the length of time that the project took. It was decided to have deinstallation of objects be concurrent with the construction work on the building, which is not usually how you do these sorts of things. You empty it out, then the building gets done, fix the building, load back in, but we were doing it sort of on a rolling basis with the idea of trying not to have the museum closed for most of it, and then also to speed up the process. Because of the complexity of sort of this renovation project, the main contract was actually awarded to the construction company, who has then subbed out the artifact moves to other contractors. So this meant that we had to communicate information about object numbers or locations, not only with sort of internal staff, like you would do in a more traditional move, but also with a variety of other contractors. We were also working in the building while construction was happening, which created some unusual challenges for object deinstallation. And because the construction company controlled the building for most of the deinstall, anyone working on site has to wear PPE. So you'll see in most of the photos I have, everyone's wearing construction gear. So if you're wondering about that, that's because it is, according to CSE, an active construction zone. So we wear the full PPE, which also sort of set a different tone, I think, than is very often found in museum deinstalls. So part of the problem with sharing a space with this many different groups is some of them see objects actually as an impediment to their work. So we need it because they're there to do lighting, rip up stuff, lay concrete. They're not, artifact handlers. So we really needed to have a flexible workflow for object deinstallation so that all parties involved in the work on the building could work in these shared spaces sort of efficiently and in a way that everyone could get their work done. So for example, in the photo you see here, we ended up kind of getting color coded by our hard hats. So like blue hard hats are NASM, yellow or white is Crozier Fine Arts, who are our artifact handlers. We have the rigging team in the orange and the black, and CSC and some white. So in any given time, you would just have a lot of different people with a lot of different priorities in the same space, working around different things, some of whom we worked with, some of whom we didn't. So obviously it presented a very big registration challenge to try to manage our part of this process. All right, so I sort of tried to break it down into 4 main registration challenges. So how do we communicate to people what the objects in the cases are? Because we know, but obviously an outside contractor isn't clear. And then how do we get objects tagged as they're removed from cases? And then how do we track them as they move through the process of being packed? And then how do we ensure that the conveyances and the shipments are then tracked properly from here to HASI so that we maintain inventory control as things move around the building and then out of the building? So I'm going to talk about how we tracked objects in two parts, actually. So there's the small objects and then the large objects, because they sort of worked in slightly different ways. So the first thing for small artifacts, someone's, I think, rolling a very large cart outside. One of the first things we needed to address was how to communicate what objects were located in which case to the contractors, so that as they deinstalled, they would know how to properly tag the objects as they went. Luckily for us, one of my colleagues had actually done a very large project before transformation started to inventory all of our galleries, and she made binders of information for each one. So one of the resources in these binders were case ID sheets, and that's what you see on the screen there. So these sheets made it possible for contractors to work at their own pace to deinstall instead of having to wait for NASM staff to ID each object in each case. So they're, it made them more independent. And then these ID photos are actually especially helpful when a case contained many objects that are similar and easy to confuse. So as you can see, the one on the left, one object in one case is usually pretty easy to identify. But if a case has many similar objects, like these Lindbergh buttons, you can really, again, they're similar, they look similar, they're all about the same size, so they're easy to mix up. So having them labeled with their object numbers keeps things very clear. So before any deinstallation started, we would provide packets of object tags, maps, and case ID photos for each gallery so that the contractors had the freedom to deinstall cases as their schedule required. It also made the deinstall process much more flexible because they were not relying on us to provide information on a case-by-case basis. They had everything they needed at hand, so they could pivot. Let's say, sometimes, again, base needs to come in, demo some walls, they need to work in front of a gallery, and you can't deinstall cases in that gallery. You have everything you need for a different gallery or a different wall. So they were not relying on somebody like me coming down and saying, well, today I plan this, and if you plan, it throws a wrench in your schedule. So they really had the flexibility to just bounce around as they needed to. So the next step in our process is tagging artifacts. Tagging artifacts in particular for NASM is a really crucial step in object handling because we don't physically number our artifacts. So without a tag, there's not a quick or easy way of identifying an object's catalog number. We also have many similar or identical objects, because a lot of our things are industrial, produced. So like a pair of pilot's wings, we have a lot of them, and they don't have any, serial numbers or things to tell them apart. So the tags are really essential to our process for keeping objects straight. So we have a standardized tag that we use for our collection that includes the very basic information of object number, object name, curatorial department, classification, and the object's unique barcode. And the tag is also made from archival materials so that it can be put in storage with the artifacts. So these tags play two crucial roles in our tracking system. So they have the human readable text so that anyone can look at it, get its basic information, good to go. And then the barcode is machine readable, and that talks to TMS and links it and helps us in our location updates. So as every object was deinstalled from the case, its tag was attached to it immediately to prevent it being disassociated from its object number. And with the small artifacts, they usually don't need to be broken down for shipment. So it's really just tag it, and then it just goes into the workflow. So barcode scanning. So once objects had been tagged, we needed a way for the contractor to provide location updates for each object as it was deinstalled and moved through the packing process. And it's obviously not practical to do that many manual moves for that many objects. And even if we wanted to, the move contractors don't have access to our collections database for obvious reasons. So barcode scanning really made this project possible for us. And this is the type that we use here. It has been funny because talking about this in sort of the outside world, everyone's like, well, I use a barcode scanner at the grocery store. Like, what's so exciting? But for us, it's really been a monumental change in how we move and change location. So hello, the lights turned off. So the scanners that we use are designed to work with our collections database, which is TMS, or the museum system, so that the moves can be uploaded to our database very easily. So the barcode scanner reads handler, location, container, and object barcodes. Sort of makes it's very streamlined and simple. We tried to make it very, idiot proof. So the way that our software is set up, you basically have your handler scan their barcode, which logs you into the scanner. You scan the barcode for the location and or the container that you're packing or moving things into. And then you scan the object barcode from the object tag, and then you upload the scan to say this is a complete sort of move. The moves are also all time stamped so that they can be run in TMS at any point after the scan, and TMS will sort them into the proper order in the location history for the object. The timestamps allow us to make it so that the contractors can scan objects as they go, and then NASM staff can upload the scans into TMS as they have time. We did not want to limit the contractors in their movement by having to have them do a scan and then have me run it on a computer. And then, we're really, again, trying not to impede the workflow at any point. So the timestamps mean TMS will sort them, even if I run the scans out of order from how they did it. TMS keeps it all nice and even and clean in the location history. For locations, because of the large number of types of locations that we needed for this project, we've come up with sort of different types of location barcodes throughout the project. We've made some sort of large format barcodes, which is the one on the top. So you basically print them out and then you can tape them onto the walls, you can tape them onto storage cages. These are usually for sort of general areas or things that you really need them to be very clear and easy to find. We also made rings of barcodes, which is the lower photo. So that usually provides any location that's available at that time in the museum to use. So all of the gallery locations, the staging locations, the in-transit locations, anything that you might need should be on that. And we tried to color code them because obviously it's a lot. So usually by gallery, we would sort of color code the ends so you could more easily flip through and distinguish what was going on. These rings are really helpful in phases of the project where the objects are being moved quickly around the building and may be stored in a number of different places where the large format barcodes can't be taped up, particularly when we're installing. They don't want us taping stuff up all over the nice new walls. They care less when you're deinstalling because it's all getting ripped out. But also some of our contractors are just bouncing all over the place. So trying to expect them to find where things have been taped up started to become difficult. So again, the ring, they can just clip onto their safety vest. They have everything they need whenever they need it. Also, because our barcode scanners make granular location moves really easy, we were able to use locations to differentiate between different contractors working on objects in the galleries if needed. So for example, at one point we had 2 different art handling companies working for us and doing things in galleries. So we were able to assign them in TMS their own work tables. So for example, Crozier, this was one of their storage cabinets, and then Eli could have theirs. So you, at any point, could look in TMS and say like this object's in Eli's custody and it's in this gallery. The contractor packing workflow. This is sort of an example of a potential scanning path for an object being packed for shipment. So obviously, again, the barcode scanners allowed us to have the very granular approach to each object movement as opposed to basically being installed and out of the building. So this really helped us keep track of, particularly at the peak when we were doing many galleries at the same time, lots of small artifacts going in different places, being packed in different galleries. We had a tight control on where everything was and where everything was moving. It also made mistakes and location updates easier to catch as we moved along. So for example, if an object in TMS showed up as being on a packing table at the end of the day, and we knew because we visually made sure all the packing tables were empty of any artifacts, that we would need to find that object and update its location so that it was accurate in TMS. So this workflow in particular shows the very typical sort of, it would come out of a display case onto a packing table so that conservation could look at it. They could do any sort of treatment reports they need, make sure it wasn't crumbling or needed any specific handling instructions. The packers could get an idea of what they needed to do to pack it. And then usually things would go into storage cages, either for lunch or so that the packer could, go off and work on the boxes without having to have the artifacts out on tables. So we need to keep track of them. And then when the boxes were ready, it gets scanned back onto the packing table. Then that box would get scanned into its shipping container, and then eventually it would get scanned into transit when it left the building. Sort of the last piece of the small artifact control is our inventory control. So once you have everything deinstalled and packed, we had to make sure that all the conveyance lists were accurate before they shipped out. It's important that we make sure that the contents of containers and pallets are accurately reflected in TMS. Because of the way the barcode scanners work, it's actually really easy to move containers, which is great. But it does mean that when you load a truck, it's a lot easier to scan 8 containers onto a truck than the 30, individual object barcode scans. So you really need to make sure that your container lists are accurate in TMS. So when you say I've moved this, it's really reflecting everything that gets moved. So as we filled our shipping containers with the packed objects, the contractor would put a copy of the object barcodes on the inventory sheet, which is on the slide. And then it also got information about what gallery the objects were from, when it was packed, who was packing. So if there were issues down the road, you can pull the sheet off the PSC and get an idea of where this thing was and who was it, so you knew who to ask questions about. And once the containers were fully packed, the NASM staff would check the inventory sheet against what TMS said to make sure that there was no discrepancies on either side. And if there were, they would check the contents and make sure everything lined up, either by fixing scans or by fixing the inventory sheet. And then once everyone is happy with it, then that got added to the list of conveyances ready to be shipped to HASI. We also checked our pallets in a similar way, but usually the sign up was just an email saying like, hey, this is ready, and then visual inspections, because container, or rather than the container logs, because pallets usually only have a couple objects, so you don't need a full list. Sometimes our container logs would be 40 things if they're all little. All right, so for large objects for us presented a unique problem because they typically need to be broken down into smaller parts for shipment. Obviously, an entire passenger airliner is pretty difficult to just move out of a building, put on a truck, and send to HASI. So TMS allows us to create component records, as part of the main object record. So that seemed like the most natural way to sort of track all these pieces. It also allows us to give each piece its own unique barcode and tag so that they can then be tracked in the same way as our small artifacts. The component records allow us to track the various pieces of a plane as it's disassembled, packed, and shipped, because they also each have their own location history. So if something is not where you think it is, you can sort of work backwards and talk to people. And so each piece has its own set of information that you can use to solve problems if you need to. Components also can be collapsed back into the main record when a plane or an object is reassembled, which means we're not like cluttering up our database with a lot of temporary records. We don't need to track every wing and spar and wheel if eventually it's just going to be one plane. Then we can have one plane, one record. So as you can see in these photos, we had multiple planes being disassembled and shipped at the same time. So having pieces tracked individually is also, sort of essential, because it's not like one plane with all of its pieces would stay in one place and you could keep track of them. Because of the way our deinstall process was working, a lot of times pieces would come off and they would go to a totally different gallery to be shipped to a totally different place to be stored. So the components of a piece really could get spread all over the museum. So they really need to have their own tracking numbers as they go. Also, very often, large artifacts take multiple shipments to leave our building. So we track their parts on the separate conveyances. Our shipping records reflect the fact that today the wings and the wheels went, and then the next day the fuselage went, and a week later, the fairings went, that kind of stuff. And then they go into different areas in storage. So they're really their own artifacts, sort of temporarily with their own lives, but we don't need to have a million new records in our database forever to track a lot of these pieces. So the component tags are basically just a modified version of our object barcode. So it contains most of the same information as the object barcode, but we also just put the component name as well as the main object name. And the components, because they're often very large themselves, like the picture here, this is the T2 wing, which is almost wingtip to wingtip the size of one of our galleries, so not small. We put barcodes on brightly colored tags to make them easier to locate. It's really, you know, if it's a fuselage, you don't want to be looking for the small white tag while you're trying to get it scanned when everyone's waiting for you. We also tried to color code using these tags, the planes and galleries. So if you had lots of different palettes of pieces in a gallery, you could sort of hone in, like if you're looking for flying wires from one plane and you're looking at 7 pallets of flying wires, you could be like, well, that was a yellow plane. So that was another way for us to try to provide contractors with a way to, like, you know, streamline and have quicker things going. The large artifact workflow. So this is an example of sort of the typical process that we used to create records and track pieces as they were removed from large objects. So as the objects are disassembled, the contractors would give us the names for the new pieces. Usually our craft specialists would say this is the left wing, you know, front inboard, you know, fairing. They had a lot of different ways because they were the ones that have to put it back together to indicate to themselves where on the plane these pieces are located and usually their function. And then after we got the names of the new pieces, we would generate the new component records, and that would give us the new barcodes. So they would give the barcodes to the contractors, and then they could attach those barcodes to the pieces, and then those pieces then get moved into the main packing workflow. Just a couple quick notes on installation. So we generally use the same workflows of scanning as deinstall, but in reverse. So small artifacts are usually brought in, so in transit from HASI, brought into storage in the gallery, and then they're scanned onto staging tables and then scanned into the cases. Components for large artifacts are, we call it deactivated, but it basically just hides the record in CMS as they're installed back on the main object. So if in the future you took the wings off something again, you could just reactivate the record, continue to use it, and then if the wings back on, you just turn it back off. So you can sort of toggle them on and off as you need. So in the photo is a pretty good example of a typical small artifact gallery installation. So we have the objects get laid out on a staging table so they can be inspected by conservation. Usually the contractor and a conservator look at the object, agree that they agree on the condition and that it's okay to install. Exhibits can come in, look at any mounting points they need to, adjust anything. And then they can get moved from the table into the case, and then you scan them into the case. So it's a really nice, easy step, and the barcode scanners just let you follow along. So some lessons learned from this project. One of our biggest is that obviously prep work is really essential for ensuring that the deinstall of objects is not hung up by registrarial questions. Because we had recent inventories of all the galleries before the installs, we knew exactly what objects are in which cases and which ones were likely to present with issues or questions. We had sort of some galleries had a lot of unnumbered props or replicas. There were some things where we had certain loan requirements. So we were able to sort of lay it out ahead of time to say, don't worry about this. This isn't your problem. Don't touch this loan, or this loan has special requirements, like everything we could provide ahead of time. So that sort of process of making sure labeling and moving objects, sort of simple, made sure that we had as much time as possible to actually inspect and pack the objects, because there was a lot of time pressure on this. So we didn't want to waste time sort of with things we could have already provided. The barcode tags also became resources for other departments in ways that we weren't anticipating. So our photographers really like to be able to tag their photos with object names or object ID or with catalog numbers, which obviously is not easy if you don't know what it is and the object's not on the number, or the number's not on the object. So they really liked having the barcodes as sort of a part of the process. Usually they will take a photo of the object with its tag, and then they take sort of the artsy one so that later they can ID it. Another aspect of our barcoding system that we didn't anticipating being as helpful as we did, but that it did actually work out, is that our barcode scanners can read barcodes off of screens as well as physical paper tags. So that really became helpful when we had to come up with solutions for things on the fly. For example, if one of the contractors didn't have access to the printed version of like the in-transit barcode, so they were in a loading dock and they forgot to take the printed version with them, you can just text them a photo of the barcode from TMS and they can scan it and then your problem solved. So we've really been the ability to disseminate information on barcodes very easily and the scanners to be able to read them in most instances has really been helpful to maintain that sort of flexibility. We also really tried to keep things streamlined because we had, a lot of different contractors and staff turnover and other things. We tried to check in periodically with all the parties involved to make sure that the process was working for them and that we didn't have a lot of unnecessary steps or confusing steps. Because obviously the less complicated we could keep things, the more likely people are to be compliant and follow the process in the way we want them to. We also really found that making time to build some fun into your day is super important. This project has been really long and challenging and fun, but there's long days and people get tired, they get frustrated, having a lot of different pressures, particularly I think art handlers working in a construction zone is not a natural environment for a lot of people. So it's not easy for everyone. So doing small things that sort of lighten the mood and tie people together into a group, particularly if the group keeps turning over, you can say like, well, the group always, we play trivia every day and we make stickers for our hard hats. So people sort of get the sense of pride of like, well, I've done all these galleries or, I always play trivia. So even if you're in and out or in different galleries, we had a way to sort of be a whole in the midst of this sort of crazy, very long project. So now that I've covered the very boring registrarial parts of transformation, I thought people would enjoy getting to see what some of the large artifact moves look like, because that's, everyone wants to see it. It's fun. It's exciting. So we have amazing teams of collection specialists, aircraft specialists, conservators, and riggers that make these moves possible. I don't do them, obviously. I label pieces and I make sure, the plane is scanned into the hanging location at the end of the day. But, the people in these photos really do truly amazing work. So the first plane that I wanted to talk about is called the Extra 260. So I really love the aerobatic planes. They're really fun because they tend to get rigged in interesting configurations, and it's a fun challenge to watch the riggers sort of figure it out and get it up in the ceiling. So the Extra 260 was flown by Patty Wagstaff, who flew this aircraft to be the first woman to win the U.S. National Aerobatic Championship in 1991, and then she defended her championship in 1992. And this aircraft is hand-built and made out of steel, wood, and carbon fiber. So it's supposed to be very light. It's very flexible in sort of a terrifying way. We also just all fell in love with this picture of Patty was up with her airplane. So she's become sort of a weird icon. We all love her. We all stand a legend. So aerobatic planes are usually pretty simple component-wise, which is lovely for me, because they're designed to be light and easily taken apart. If you're taking this to a show, you don't want 400 pieces to assemble. You also don't want it to be overly engineered. These things are designed to be really flexible and really fast and really nimble. So in this case, the Extra only had 12 components. And that's really, it was just small pieces of, it was basic fuselage, the one wing, and things like pitot tubes or some control surfaces, but really in the grand scheme of things, not a lot. So the planes like these, we like to very often display them upside down because it's dynamic and it's exciting, and you can also get sort of a look into the cockpit from below. So I've learned over the course of this process that stunt planes are actually engineered to be able to hang off of their propellers, because when you're flying straight up, which is not something most planes can do, all of the weight is actually hanging off the propeller. The propeller is dragging the plane straight up in the air. So because these planes are designed this way, you can actually use the propellers as the rigging point to flip the plane. So the riggers basically attach their rigging stuff to the propeller, lift it up to the height where they want it, and then they can grab the tail and then lift it up to the position so that it's fully upside down and rigged in the gallery. And it's very exciting to watch. So this is what it looks like sort of as I get it up there. And then once we hung another plane in front of it, this is not quite finished, but it gives you sort of an idea of like what it looks like in the gallery and what sort of hanging things upside down can do. And it makes it very exciting. The other one I wanted to talk about is the Douglas DC-3. So this is sort of the old classic passenger airliner. So it's actually the first profitable model of passenger aircraft. Prior to this, most passenger aircraft was actually subsidized by the US Postal Service. The cost of shipping mail is actually what got airlines off the ground, not people. So this is sort of the first plane that is built to be comfortable enough for people, hold enough, but still be cheap enough to operate, that passenger airliners can actually become a business as opposed to just being subsidized mail routes with people also on them. So in 1936, 95% of all US commercial aircraft traffic was on planes like this, the DC-3. And ours flew more than 56,000 hours with Eastern Airlines. So this bad boy came apart into 82 pieces. So obviously it's a really big job to get crafts like this rigged and lowered so that they can be disassembled. We obviously don't do disassembly in the air because that would be very difficult and dangerous. So this plane is actually so large that one of its wings hangs over the balcony. So they removed the wingtip in order to be able to lower it all the way to the ground. So you can see in the second picture, it's actually missing that wingtip. So they did actually have to get up in the lift and sort of do that part before they could do the rest of the disassembly. We typically leave the planes like this while they're disassembling because it's the most stable. Where they take pieces apart, the rigging points keep it nice and solid until they got it to a point where they lower it onto a cart. So once you get everything pulled apart, disassembled, it gets sent out to Hazy, where it goes into the restoration hangar, and our amazing preservation and restoration unit folks, our shop guys, get it cleaned up, do any, paint restorations, fixes, whatever. Some of these planes have been hanging in the museum basically since it opened, so they needed some TLC. So once they go through that whole process, they then get, in some cases, rewrapped depending on the plane. In this case, the DC-3 is very large, so it's an oversized load, so it went down at night, and they use a big crane to pick it up and put it back on the cart and then get it into the building. So this is pretty typically a typical look at like what it would look like once we get the plane in, and then shipment after shipment of all of its pieces come in and they get them lined up so that the aircraft specialist that can then say like, I'm ready for this piece of fairing, I'm ready for this, and things slowly start to come back together. So you can see them bringing the wings on in the other picture. And this is where my team starts to come into play. So as they reassemble the wings, or like all of those bolts they're using to put the wings back together with, were tracked with a component number, so we didn't lose them in between, going there and back. So as things are assembled, we retire the components. You attach a wing, you give me the tag, and then I say, great, one wing is attached, so we don't need to track it in TMS anymore. We know where it is, it's attached to the plane. Same thing, like if they put an engine on, give me the tag, retire it, we say, great, engine's now part of the plane again. And then once they get it all totally assembled, it gets re-rigged, put on its permanent rigging, and then they just keep working their way through the gallery. So that's sort of it in process before all the other planes get loaded in. And then we also come in and obviously load in all the small stuff underneath once all the planes are done. And then also just some fun facts, because anyone that knows me knows that I love fun facts. So the Douglas World Cruiser is actually the most componented plane we had. It is not our largest. It is sort of size does not determine how many pieces something's going to come apart in. Experimental aircraft typically have 3 pieces because they're not designed to come apart. Later, more modern aircraft, again, are usually designed to come apart in chunks. So this one had a lot of flying wires. That's the things that cross in between the wings, spars. And then it also had little lovely panels that cover up every attaching point for the wires for streamlining. So it makes it great to fly, makes it really terrible to track. So that one sort of exploded into a million pieces. And then the most moves we have for an object to date is the Boeing 247D, which is the gray plane below the DC-7 in that picture. So that one, out of all of the, if you add up all of the moves for all of the pieces, we had 1,371 moves to take it down, disassemble it, take it out to Hazy, move it around in storage, bring it back, and then put it all back together. So not a small undertaking, but very, very worth it. I also wanted to do a quick shout out. Most of the photos in the slideshow were taken by our amazing photography staff. So if you want to see a lot more cool photos like this and photos of the gallery, they do have a Flickr page and you can click around you. And they also do all of our other events, but it's really cool to see all the behind the scenes transformation photos they take. So definitely worth a check. And that's it. So questions.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was wonderful. I'll kick off our questions, but everyone should feel extremely free to also offer their own questions. Can you share a little bit about the switching of normal work hours for you guys, like some of the third shift things the registrars had to do? That's a bit unusual.
Yeah, again, it's really the nature of working with a construction company means that sometimes they get ideas like, we're going to do Saturday work, or we work on federal holidays. So over time we have gotten rid of some of those, but it was really, you just have to bow to the powers that be and hope that they don't continue. But it helps to have, we had a team of 2 and now we have a team of 3, so we can really try to balance things out so someone's not always having to take later shifts. Also with barcode scanning, we did do some like night deinstalls. But because our contractors were good enough at what they do at that point in the project, that we trusted them that they could scan basically all night and I could come in the morning and run all their scans. And if we had questions, we could send them emails. So it was like, working with someone seemingly on the other side of the world, because email someone and then 12 hours later you get their response. But yeah, barcodes really make a lot of things possible.
Okay, that's awesome. Again, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hands and Jen or I can reach out to you. I see Stephanie Ferris also. What's up, Stephanie? Has a question about barcoding. So Emily, who was responsible for printing the barcode labels and where did that happen? Did you need the ability to print new or extra labels on the fly?
Yes, so we have 2 barcode printers that print on the archival stock with the ink. And we, for a while, had basically had them on a mobile cart, like a little teacher's cart, which we had down in the galleries, and IT was really great and they helped because you have to have a computer tower. So it was a tower and our printers. So we did almost all the printing of the barcodes. So the initial run we would do before, and then anything for components, or if they were like, I folded one of the sticky barcodes on accident, I need a new one, we could then print them for them on site, basically downstairs. I think that answers it.
Yeah, awesome. Marisa, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Great talk. Well, hi. Great talk. I have one question that it has to do with tracking, but mostly the fact that, some of these things have been up for years, right? They haven't, the interior of them hasn't been looked at. So how much conservation work was done on the stuff that the public wasn't seeing, or the little kind of stuff that, is not maybe as important to, the public's vision of the object that was actually, how much work part of the transition was part of that conservation work? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So typically that's the part that happens at Hazy. So during deinstall, particularly for the older craft that had been up for a long time, the initial sort of intellectual idea for displays is that every cockpit had to have a pilot in it, so it looked like it was flying. We did not maintain that. That was not easy to do, but so there were some cockpits where we had to go in, take the mannequin out and be like, what is this? Because our curator at the time would be like, I need a flight suit, and just pull one, and then we wouldn't have any record of what it was, So there's some registrar please let there be a tag tucked into the front pocket. Do me a solid here. So we did have some of that. There was also going into the larger aircraft to be like, is there anything in here that maybe with modern standards we would not want to transport? So one of them I think still had its original fire extinguisher, so obviously we pulled that. Or loose things like coffee pots, because this is another intellectual argument we have a lot between when you put an aircraft on display, you can't see the inside usually, but curators and PRU staff very often feel like it should be restored to what it would look like. So all of the inside should be, if you could climb into the plane, it would be there. So we had things like coffee pots and fire extinguishers and ladders. So there was that sort of initial look, pull anything out that might damage or roll around or be a hazard. And then when it goes out to HASI, PRU staff cleans it all, inspects the inside, makes sure nothing is falling apart. Sometimes conservation comes in. Our textile conservator would look at like the fabrics on the seats. I know they made fabric covers for some of the planes that went back up because you can't see them very well, and we're just baking them. They get sun damage. So again, the sort of fight between like, well, I want it to look original versus protection of the artifact. But most treatment sort of at least stabilizing and documenting the inside happens while it's at HASI in storage, and then it comes back downtown.
And are those like documentations, like those photos, is that part of either the public's access to those records? Like, does the public get to like see like what did the seat covers look like when, you know, that wasn't part of the original setup? Is it on TMS? Like, how is that preserved? Is it just in the conservation file?
Yeah, it's mostly just internal. If photos are good enough or they're put in the media, they can be flagged to be pushed out to the public. We do cockpit scans are really popular. We have a whole program. So like if they can get into the 3D cockpit, that's like a whole part of our website. So those typically are public, but usually if they're just doing treatment reports, that's just an internal resource for the next time in 40 years to be like, well, this is what it looked like. So.
Okay, question from Natalie. What materials were the most useful for supporting large objects that may need physical reinforcements while moving? Did you construct custom supports of wood or metal, Ethafoam planks, coroplast?
So this is not 100% my bailiwick. I think I might have seen a few people on here from our large artifact teams. We could probably speak better to it. But we do, at least I can tell you, for large artifacts, the biggest distinction we make between is long-term storage and short-term storage. Because we are limited in the amount of wood we can have in storage, only things that we're returning back downtown, we're allowed to be on wooden pallets. And then things that are going into permanent storage go on aluminum pallets. And then I know we use a lot of F-foam and Tyvek, but really, because it's an industrial collection, a lot of times like a spar is pretty solid. So, you know, you just get it on the pallet with your blue board, tie it down, maybe give a couple supports, but these are not sort of huge, elaborate supports for this stuff. So it's usually pretty sturdy.
Okay, awesome. Question from Clara. What kind of pre-planning were you able to do before the deinstall? Were there any issues of space that you ran into when moving the objects into storage?
There's never enough space. Just always a collections problem. So for pre-planning, at least from the registration side, because we had all of the amazing inventories of the galleries, we really felt like we were on solid ground to be able to flag issues. We also had in the binders, my colleague had flagged out, is there a hazard? Most instrumentation before, I think, 1975-ish is radioactive. The glowing paint is radium. So flagging things like, again, it's really, if you lick the radium off, you're in danger. It's not like, but you need to know. Or again, if you're pregnant or have other health issues, these are things we just want you to know. There's also very often engines have asbestos. Again, just like don't scratch your nails on it. We did have... Baker, the monkey, probably, you know, has asbestos when she was taxidermied. So there's like random things that are weird. So we try to flag hazards, things like that. In terms of pre-planning, I think storage, it really is sort of it's an ebb and a flow. We built a storage facility onto HASI with the intention of it being the swing space for transformation. And then after transformation, it will become, as we empty Garber, it will hold that part of our collection. But there's only so much, because again, it's hard to predict like what pieces of like, particularly large artifacts will come off and won't. Every plane has its own attitude, and sometimes even if it's designed to come across a certain way, like doesn't always want to. So we had sort of general ideas, but particularly the storage was just like moving things around, particularly even downtown in the galleries. It was just scooching things around as things got disassembled and packed. So.
Emily, can you real fast talk about the taxidermied animals you guys had to deal with in this process?
Well, we had some very, very sad penguins that we had, it was on loan from Natural History. I suspect a long time ago, we said, hey, because we have a polar exploration plane, which is actually really cool. It's called the Polar Star. And it was really over-engineered. So it's like really sturdy, but very heavy. And all of the supplies go to the wing. So when it lands, it actually bent itself a little bit. So you can see the the bend marks in it from sort of the hard landing it took in the polar region. But I think as part of the set display, we were like, oh, what if we had some penguins? So they sent us some very, very sad penguins, I think, because they were like, well, we don't need these one. And one of them, notoriously, its head would like to slide off. So we kept having to get it fixed. So we were very sad to see our penguins go. So we had penguins. We also had a couple of like stuffed birds, which again, I think natural history just found and stuffed for us. Again, this was a while ago, it was supposed to be the evolution of flight. So there's like a moth and a bat and a bird, and then early aircraft. But Baker is really our true space animal. We also have spiders and fish. I don't think we have fruit flies, but those are from the shuttle program. So Baker, we don't have the skeleton. I think it's the National Medical Collection has the skeleton. For some reason, they separated that and that went one place, and then we got the monkey. And then we don't display her anymore, but she used to be in the primate capsule, looking terrifying. I don't like her.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Question from the incomparable Kayla Coleman. Do you, as the registrar in your department, have a say in the collections management system that the museum is using? And do you find TMS user-friendly for a project of this magnitude?
So a million years ago, I think back in the 90s, our office led the effort to find what we were using. So they picked TMS. Obviously, TMS is technically an art database, and we come at it from a completely different direction, which I think Gallery Systems is always a little, every time we email them like, hey, so I'm trying to put 150 components in this, and they're like, why? That's not what we're envisioning. So yeah, we're I think very creative in our use, but it also, I think, makes us very flexible. Like we're not bound, I think, by the rules that people, so we change the names of fields. We do all sorts of crazy stuff. We have a very good database administrator, which also helps. So for us, TMS was pretty user-friendly. It also has the barcode manager tool. So it talks to our barcode scanners. And once you sort of understand how that works, that's really easy to run the scans. So for us, it's what we know, and we're very comfortable in it. I don't know that everyone would enjoy the way we use TMS, but it's like our numbers. It makes sense to us, but maybe not everyone else.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We have a couple more minutes, so if anyone else has a question, please feel free. Yeah, Emily, if there's any other fun little anecdotes you feel compelled to share, please feel free to use the time. I also know a lot of you are on your lunch break, so if you need to duck out early and have a couple minutes to yourselves, completely understand. Yeah.
Let's see. Things I've learned in the process of making component names. Full disclosure, going in, didn't really know anything about planes, don't really care about planes. I'm a space girl. I didn't use rockets for this particular proposal because they're not as interesting parts-wise. It's usually like 4 stages of a rocket. They're not designed to come apart in a million pieces, so they're not as interesting photo-wise. But very early on, I was given a request for a pair of pants. The tag for pant, I was like, this feels like you're lying to me. But they're actually in these sort of 1920s airplanes, the bit of metal that goes over the wheels to make them more aerodynamic are called pants. Sometimes they're called spats, and I argue that's a better. We had a very long discussion if a plane could wear pants, how would it wear pants? And I think something that just covers a wheel doesn't count as pants. But the aircraft specialists disagree with me. So they're airplane pants in TMS. So that's always a good one. We also learned that the cone that covers a propeller is a spinner. If you call it a nose cone, every old man in the gallery will be like, I don't see any rockets, because rockets have nose cones and planes have spinners. They get real sassy about it. And or if you tag it, they'll be like, well, I can't ask for what this is because you called this a nose cone, so I can't use it. So if you ever need to ask an old man about an airplane, it's the spinner. They're very
That's amazing
about it.
Oh, we love the sass. We do have one more question from Selena. Also, shout out, what's up, Selena? Since many of the objects had been on display since the building was constructed, was this also an opportunity for the collection's photographers to take images of objects?
Yes, we really appreciated, again, getting to look inside, doing some more, I think, modern conservation techniques. The Spirit of St. Louis, part of its thing is it always has to be on display, and we always have to have the door open. So for a long time, it was just a wide open door, has a wicker seat that's not great, filled with a lot of dust. So over the years, they've really tried to adapt and change like the plexi. So having all these things come in where you can really get into it. We don't, I think, take as many pictures of the inside of aircraft, in part because the shop guys are really responsible for the aircraft, but we do at least get to get in, inspect. Our conservators can go look for radioactive issues or the seats that are crumbling. I think one of the planes, they used rocks for ballast. So I think we've removed that and put more archival sort of things in so that, you know, it doesn't move around when it's rigged, but also it doesn't have a ton of rocks in the back as a surprise.
Yeah, but that was fun to find.
Yeah, it's always an adventure.
Amazing. Well, Emily, thank you so much again for sharing your transformation expertise and experience. That was so interesting, and I am sure the masses with me completely appreciated it. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, and everyone who attended, thank you so much for coming out. Like I said, if you're not a member of NEMA, please feel very encouraged to join. Even if you're not in New England, that's okay. And the Registrar and Collections Care Specialist Group will continue to have these little lunchtime lectures. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. This was great. Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having me.
Emily.
Of course.